Hello, everybody, and welcome to the July 13th, 2021 iteration of the SIG Windows Kubernetes community meeting. As always, these meetings are recorded and uploaded to YouTube, so please adhere to all of the CNCF code of conduct and standards. Let's get into things. I see a lot of people on the call, and I haven't been here for many months, so I don't know if most of the people here are new or just returning, but if anybody kind of wants to say hi or would like to know who anybody else is on the call, either raise your hand or just speak up and say hi. I see a couple new people. Or Marguerite, have you been joining? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning, folks. Yeah, this is actually my first time joining those meetings. My name is Margaret. I've joined the container platform team recently. Before that, I was in Windows kernel. I'm really hoping to learn a lot here, and then we can, do great things together.
Awesome. Thanks for joining. Okay, can continue with the agenda. First thing is announcements. We're kind of we're into the end game of the Kubernetes 122 release. Code freeze was last Thursday. I think that all of the PRs that we really were hoping to land landed. Anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, but if not, the best we can do is get them in early in 123 and try and backport. The next important milestones are test freezes coming up. That's this Thursday, July 15th. James or Jay, are we tracking any kind of critical test coverage improvements or?
I think the tests look pretty good at this point.
So. Yeah, we were just reviewing those the 15 minutes prior to this meeting for anybody who kind of joined in the middle of that. So if you're interested in helping to keep our test signal green, feel free to join next week. The next kind of important date is docs freeze. So July 27th is when the docs team would like all of the docs PRs for 122 to be, I don't think they need to be merged, but they need to be reviewed and approved. There's usually a shortage of doc reviewer bandwidth. So if anybody's planning on opening doc changes, it really helps the docs team and reviewers to get those in early. I think we have a placeholder doc or PR open for the Windows host process containers. There was another one for graduating the CSI plugins on Windows to stable. If there's any other docs, just make sure it has the SIG Windows label on the PR, and we'll pick it up and get that done. All right, Jay's adding a couple of agenda items for. Do you want to take over for a little bit, Jay?
Yeah, I don't know if anyone else has anything else. Feel free to interrupt me. I just added these because they were on my mind and we were going to go through them during the pairing sessions anyways. But I do see CSI proxy is stable. What do we want to just quickly jump to that and then go back to the dev stuff, since that's going to be a part of the pairing stuff?
Yeah,
So I'm not sure if there's anybody on the call from the CSI team, but I was meeting with them yesterday and they asked me to just mention it here. Is anybody there? I can't see everybody, but
I don't see Jing or Deep, who are people I usually get information from on this.
Yeah, so they've been doing a lot of work to get this to go to stable. The KEP got approved for stable, and they've updated a bunch of docs and improved and got a review done on the API that they've created to make this work. And so tomorrow they're actually cutting the release of the CSI proxy binary. And so that should become available either tomorrow or Thursday, but sometime this week. So if you're using Windows and you're using CSI, go ahead and try this out and make sure to give feedback. So thank you.
And I may be my information may be a little bit outdated, but if I remember, the plan for this was to go to stable without the host process, without having these run as a daemon set and as host process containers, because there is some kind of criticality due to the in-tree storage providers getting removed. Is that this release or next release? We'll have to follow up on that. But either way, they wanted a stable way to run the out of tree storage plugins, and it's been really stable for a while now, so now's the right time. There's still going to be some effort in this area to run the CSI proxy in a daemon set once host process containers are released, which will be 122. And there's a separate Slack channel for, I think it's either Windows CSI or CSI Windows, if anybody has any questions or comments or runs into any issues there.
And there's a weekly meeting as well on Monday afternoons if you need an invite to that.
All right, back to the dev environment. Jay, did you have some questions or?
Yeah, yeah, I was just telling some of our downstream friends here about that news about CSI proxy. They'll be excited to hear that. So thanks for that update. Cool. So yeah, I was wondering, how's Hyper-V looking? I know there's just Friedrich and Mark. And so for those of you that are new, we have this SIG Windows DevTools environment that will spin up working Windows cluster with different CNI providers and stuff to play around with from 1.22 from bleeding edge, so you can really bang away at the Kubernetes on Windows, and including hacking the source code and stuff. But so far it only works on VirtualBox, and I've hit various CNI and CRI issues. So once you really drill into it, there are a couple of kinks we haven't worked out yet, but for the most part, it works for me for testing kubelet, kubeproxy, the rest of it. So Mark,
yeah,
what's the latest with the Hyper-V?
I spent a little bit of time trying to get this to work on a Windows machine that had Hyper-V kind of as the virtualization layer. The first issue, like at first I was trying to just do it with pure Hyper-V. So using the Hyper-V provider with Vagrant, which is what the dev environment's based off of. And I ran into some issues that I think a couple of folks have also run into when we're trying to work around, in particular, Jamie Phillips. The issue, one of the big issues that I ran into right off the bat is the way that the provisioning scripts work assume that there's a static IP addresses that gets passed into the kubeadm init call and then all of the kubeadm join calls. Turns out that with Hyper-V on Vagrant, you can have it create private networks, but you can't. You need to either rely on DHCP or some other way of kind of assigning the IP addresses. It won't give you a static IP address. There's ways around that, which are to kind of capture what the IP address of the machine is as they come up, and then use the synced folders to inject those IP addresses into the provisioning scripts, which I believe Jamie got working. We can maybe link to some repos. But then on maybe yesterday, I found that apparently you can run VirtualBox on top of Hyper-V, and now VirtualBox supports what they call para-virtualization, where if you're running VirtualBox on top of Hyper-V on a Windows machine, it will kind of defer most of the calls to the Hyper-V APIs and run VMs with that. That has the added benefit of a lot of the niceties that VirtualBox has, like shared folders that don't rely on SMB shares, and assigning private IP addresses just work. So I was able to, after tweaking a lot of timeouts, get the dev environment as is defined just in the master branch for the Kubernetes SIGs to come up in on VirtualBox on a Windows machine that was using the Hyper-V para-virtualization layer. So that might be a kind of an easier time for people to go forward with. I opened up a PR with my changes, but can leave it up for comments.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, so you've got it working.
And I will clarify, by work, both of the nodes joined or came up, and I did have a 2-node cluster when I SSH into the control plane. I did not try and schedule any workloads to it, but I saw all the Entrée provisioning came up. CNI, like when I was poking around in the cluster, it said that CNI was up.
Awesome. Okay.
I had it with pure Hyper-V working like 2 or 3 minutes ago. I finally got it working with pure Hyper-V. I'm basically at the same position as Mark is. I've not run any containers on it, but I got two nodes and they're connected. And the workaround, one workaround was getting the IP address of the server with a Linux command, and then we sent the kube join directly with the IP address, so IP address was resolved. And the other problem was with the synchronized directories, because that was really messed up, and I temporarily fixed this. So I guess it would no longer be compatible with the normal hypervisor that we use, but I guess it proves that it is possible, and maybe we have to do work a little with some if statements, but it's obviously possible.
Oh, great. So we've got sort of a good problem, which is there are multiple ways to get it working on Hyper-V. So who wants to help Bart? Because Bart just joined, and in the middle of all this chaos, he's like, how do I get this thing working on Hyper-V? So there's two paths forward. You could do Mark's thing, or you could do Friedrich's.
Yeah, I will try out the PR that is open. Let me try that out, and if I run into problems, I can ping the guys, and that's, I think, what I will do.
Great.
Yeah, and
That's
I
really
think
cool.
moving forward, we can either use this or one of the pairing sessions to try and decide which route we want to just take going forward. If we want to do keep everything on VirtualBox and rely on pair virtualization, or if we want to try and do edit the Vagrant files to be more kind of Hyper-V native focused.
It feels that we need to go to the second one, but let's first start with the first one, and then try to move over to full Hyper-V.
And it sounds like all of them really would work, right? If somebody wanted to use VirtualBox, they could use with Hyper-V underneath. That would be an implementation detail right? So we could just dock them.
Yeah,
Cool.
I also ran into all sorts of issues with getting the synced folders working with SMB shares too. Apparently that doesn't work if your computer accounts are active domain or or AAD joined like accounts and not local accounts. So there may be a lot of gotchas, whereas at least for me, the synced folders in VirtualBox just worked.
Yeah.
So can I ask a question? So why are we trying this on Hyper-V? This is trying to get the environment running on a Windows machine. Is that what
Yes
is behind it? Okay.
Yeah, so this dev environment is an issue that I guess Jay and a couple other folks started because it's very hard to spin up a new Kubernetes cluster when you don't have access to a cloud environment that is using kind of bleeding edge or tip of tree Kubernetes bits. So this was one kind of way of helping people and hopefully making it easier to contribute to Kubernetes or SIG Windows to spin up this environment. And
I think it's very needed. I've done like setup environment. James one time helped me like 2 years ago, and that machine crashed. So I still don't have environment. So I think it's a very important effort. What I'm trying to understand is, so when you're using Hyper-V, so you're probably expecting the developer to have Windows Server running on your machine. Is that what the expectation is?
We're using Vagrant here, and Vagrant is kind of cross-platform and helps abstract some of that. So I think the goal here is to be able to get a cluster running either no matter what your development box is. So, Linux, Mac OS, or Windows. I think most people who are probably running on Windows are going to have the Hyper-V virtualization stack installed. So that's why we're kind of pursuing this. But on Linux, I'm guessing it's going to be VirtualBox or VMware.
I started also another path because I'm using WSL a lot. That was like, hey, maybe I can do a mixture there. That was my starting point, and I was very far with that. It's like the only thing what I need is like a Hyperbox for my Windows one. There is cross network possible, etc., etc. There's now I'm going to switch back to the Hyper-V, and then probably go also in the path that I want to go to WSL and and have an Hyper-V box next to it for the Windows part. That should be an awesome.
Yeah, I saw
setup.
that Vagrant does support running
Yes,
with
yes.
WSL, but you're pretty adventurous for trying
Yeah,
that
but
out.
I did run into that already, because you need to have the same version on both machines. Like on Linux, you need to have the same version on WSL. I'm pretty far with that, but I'm going to switch over to the Hyper part now and take the bits from Friedrich and the other guys and see if I can get that part up and running, and then jump back to WSL. So because I think it should be an awesome thing if we have WSL in combination with Hyper-V, and that we can, that should be an awesome setup. But let's see. That's
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, Bart. I think one suggestion, I was looking at this SIG Windows development. I mean, it's pretty awesome, but I think it's not clearly called out on what machine you are doing. I believe a lot of these commands won't work on, Windows, and even setting up a Hyper-V or WSL could be a challenge for someone who's just starting, right? So I'm just thinking if we should add those instructions here, what you guys are going through.
Yeah, I think once it's to a point where it's more turnkey than it is right now, we should definitely update with how to set it up. I mean, you can use Chocolatey and just to install Vagrant and VirtualBox if you don't have anything.
Exactly.
At some point. I don't think we're quite there yet, but
yeah, if you get like a brand new Windows machine or Mac OS, what are literally the steps that will get you to the environment?
Yeah, check.
Cool.
Okay.
So this is great, Bart. So, this is a new project. So we are looking for owners and maintainers and stuff. So if you have time to really help us to like own this story and drive it forward as far as the Hyper-V stuff, feel free to just get in there and make PRs. And
yes, I'm going to do that.
Shy. Okay.
No,
Thank you.
I will.
Yeah. Cool. I just really appreciate everybody that's helping, Mark and Bart and everyone else who's
Friedrich,
just jumping in here and trying this stuff out. And of course, Friedrich for getting it working today on Hyper-V and all the other stuff he's done to get us to this point. So, but everybody that's testing, thanks a lot. So I can share. My update is so I don't know if Danny's here. I added Calico support last weekend and it was working, but I hit this wall where HCS shim would time out. I mean, HCS shim was not able to attach the network to start the container. So it's real weird because actually Calico was able to receive a CNI add command from containerd, but after it added it, it wasn't able to attach it. And I never really collected any logs on it or anything. So I don't have any logs or anything to prove that, but we could try to look at that today. And I wish I had an environment up and running, but I could try to set one up. It doesn't usually take that long. Does anybody else have anything else they want to do before we jump into the pairing stuff? And also, of course, we don't have to do that for pairing. We could look at other stuff if people have other ideas of stuff they want to look at.
If there's nothing else, go ahead. There was just an issue from a few weeks back with log rotation in Docker. I'm going to paste the link in here, but that was resolved in one of the latest releases of Docker. And so if you are running into that issue, I think Jeremy initially reported it and helped reproduce it. And so if you did run into that, I'll link it in here. You'll need the latest release of Docker to resolve that issue. So I just wanted to call that out because it was on our notes from a few weeks ago.
Okay. Cool.
And I know that we're still in the 122 release too, but if anybody's planning on either progressing or introducing new enhancements, it helps to get those reviewed early. I know that Ravi's still working or has the work in progress one open for using runtime classes to identify Windows nodes that we're looking for either comments on, but even if it's not an enhancement, it helps to get just a head start on all of those.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about earlier too. Like I just wanted to nag because I would like to get some feedback early so that I can get started on the implementation.
Yeah, I will take a look at that this week.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. So the target for that is to merge in 123. Is the implementation like hard there? Ravi, is there a lot of implementation work there, or is it like more just like a formality?
Like I know the places where the changes need to be made, but I need to get an act from the owners of that particular part of the code base. Yeah, for example, I have 2 or 3 places where I can make this change. All of them would be perhaps at the admission server layer. And the other thing is, say if we go ahead with the other approach instead of going with runtime classes, say if we decide to go with having a field in the pod spec, that needs API reviews too. So in both the cases, we need people from other areas, owners to actually respond to us. And that would take some time. That's what I'm a bit concerned about.
Yeah, probably we'd want SIG to comment too. But Jordan Liggett is probably the most up-to-date, the person who would be able to do any API reviews and knows the scheduler quite well and is kind of familiar with Windows. So we should definitely get feedback from him.
Yeah,
I can
think
help.
one thing they are waiting on is actually getting consensus within Windows SIG. Like once we get that, I can actually push Jordan and other folks to review it immediately.
Makes sense. All right. Yep. Let's try and prioritize getting consensus for that then.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks for starting that. It does help to have it open early. It really does.
Yeah, the main thing is like once we get consensus internally, we need to get reviews from external SIGs. That will be the hardest part.
Yep.
Do we have, is it simple enough that we could get a handshake consensus right now? Like, is it that complicated? It didn't seem like it was that controversial, but 2.8, I know it requires a full review, but is there anything specific that you think is going to be a long tail debate, or is it just a matter of us going through the details? I'm looking at the KEP right now.
I think the main thing that we could maybe get agreement on is the use of runtime classes, because that seems like the path of least resistance at this point.
Yeah, the one thing that came up with this for, I forgot why, but earlier was that there was, there were other, somebody else floated the idea of using runtime classes to help identify this. Oh, I think for some of the, like, for the pod security policies. And one thing that came out of that discussion was that for Docker shim, there is a default runtime class named Docker shim that you can use. But the issue is that that runtime class is named Docker shim for both Linux and Windows. So you can't differentiate. But given that Docker shim is pretty much, I'd say, like sunsetted for containerd, that may not be, like, given the timeline of when this would actually go into effect, that may be a moot point.
Yeah, so to be clear, Mark, the implementation that I'm proposing here is not based on the name of the runtime class. The presence of a particular label, which is kubernetes.io/hostname, /OS, that would actually, the presence of that in the scheduling constraints of a runtime class gives us an indication that this is a Windows pod.
Mm-hmm.
So we would not go by the name because that would be hard. And it also requires manual configuration from the cluster admin side.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think I had maybe some reservations on just whether or not we should be using a particular pod spec, like adding a field to the pod spec versus just using runtime classes. But I guess I didn't realize that you were using the label inside the runtime class, which actually kind of makes a lot of sense. So I'd like to read through it in more detail, but that detail in particular helps me be a little bit leaning towards that a little bit more. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder, let's either dedicate some time to this in either next week or the week of the 27th, or possibly have a spin-off like community meeting just to discuss this. If we do want to get some feedback from some other people, it might be worthwhile to have them in some of the conversations with this too. So maybe we can try and schedule one at a time that would work for some of the other folks too. But
Yeah, I'm fine with having a dedicated time to for me to go over this, and then we can discuss.
Mhm.
Later.
I think that SIG security is also going to be interested in this because it has implications for restricting different pod security policies that are OS specific.
Yeah.
Like having them either like apply or not apply. So that might be good to get involved too. I can find some people.
Yeah, that's how we started this.
Mhm.
And if I remember correctly, what Tim during the PSP replacement time frame suggested was in 124, when this goes GA, by default, the policy that would come up is restricted. And in restricted policy, we are going to enforce certain constraints that may be Linux specific. And by that time, they would want us, the Windows community, to come up with a way to uniquely identify the Windows pods during the admission time, so that they can say that, hey, this is a Windows pod, I do not care about it. If you want to implement some security policies, you may have to implement your own admission webhook.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the extension mechanism they are providing for the entry ones. They're going to provide certain security constraints, but not everything is going to be present.
And I think a follow-up to that conversation was that it may be acceptable for the kubelet to do some checks too, and not add all of the security context details based on what OS it is to help with that too. But I need to refresh my memory on that too.
You mean like stripping some unnecessary Linux specific constraints on the Windows kubelet side?
Yeah, in the kubelet, if we're running on a Windows node.
I mean, we do that, but the problem is, like say every distribution is going to have its own admission plugin. Like in case of OpenShift, we have our own.
Yep.
Some of those security constraints may not be applied to Kubernetes. So we may have to end up having carry patches in kubelet, which actually strips certain things, or we may have to put them in upstream Kubernetes code, where it may not be of much help to the rest of the community.
Yep. Yeah, there is kind of downsides to everything.
Yeah. But in any case, if you want to go over this, I can perhaps set up a follow-up meeting sometime next week or the week after that, and we can go through this.
Yeah, let's discuss this on Slack this week to figure out when we want to have the follow-up meeting.
Sure.
Yeah, I would like to be involved in the discussion as well. I'm seeing a couple of other use cases that could pop up for this, but
yeah, I'll send that invite to
okay.
SIG Windows mailing list. Whoever is interested can join, and then the SIG security to mark in case they are interested.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, thank you.
Well, thanks, Ravi.
Yep.
If anybody else doesn't have anything, I'm happy to jump to pairing.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording for this community meeting. I'm going to hop over to SIG Node 2 then, and then come back. They had a pretty light agenda. But all right, you can take over, Jay.
Okay, let me see here.
All right, I'll be back in a few minutes, hopefully.
share. Host, oh god, I gotta do host key. Can you give me the host key, James?